Mark sat in his study, the silence in the mansion almost unbearable. It had been a quiet week, and despite his mixed feelings about the child, he couldn't help but notice that he hadn't heard the baby cry in quite some time. The house had been eerily still, and an uneasy feeling crept up on him. Had something happened? His mind raced, torn between the bitterness he felt towards the child, and the nagging worry that something was wrong. With a reluctant sigh, Mark rose from his chair, his footsteps heavy as he walked toward the hallway. His heart pounded in his chest with each step, his thoughts tangled with guilt and confusion. As he neared the baby's room, he heard something, soft, comforting words that he didn't recognize. The voice was calm, melodic, and something about it stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't Nana's voice, it was a woman's, but it carried a warmth that tugged at something deep inside him. Mark found himself standing still, just outside the slightly ajar door, drawn in by the soothing sound of the voice. It was as though the voice had a magnetic pull, easing something within him. He stayed there, caught between listening and stepping away, unable to pull himself from the sound. His breath caught in his throat as the voice continued, tender and soft. It made his heart flutter, confused and uncertain about the unfamiliar reaction it stirred in him. Then, just as suddenly, the baby's cry broke through the moment, sharp and demanding. Mark snapped back to reality, his worry returning full force. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The child needed him. He couldn't be the indifferent father he had tried so hard to be. Determined, he pushed the door open slightly and stepped inside. The sight before him made him stop dead in his tracks. A young woman sat in the rocking chair by the window, cradling the baby in her arms. Her dark hair framed a gentle face, and though she looked weary, there was a warmth in her presence that seemed to fill the room. The baby nursed contentedly, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of the woman's blouse, while she gazed down at her with a tender smile that Mark hadn't seen directed at the child before. For a few moments he could only stare. The scene before him felt oddly intimate, a stark contrast to the cold detachment he'd allowed himself to feel toward the baby. Finally, his voice came out low and rough. "Who are you?"
Linda looked up, startled by his voice. She quickly adjusted the baby in her arms, the moment of comfort broken. Her face flushed and she stammered, I'm Linda. Nana brought me here to help."
Mark's mind raced. "Help?" he echoed, confused. "With what?"
"I'm here to take care of her," Linda said softly, still holding the baby with tenderness.
Mark's gaze flickered between the baby and Linda. His emotions were a whirlwind, but one thing was clear. The child was safe, at least for now. "You're taking care of her?" he repeated, his voice a little harsher than intended.
Linda nodded, a small reassuring smile on her face, though it was weary. "I promised Nana I would."
There was a long silence, Mark processing her words, the sight of her with the baby unsettling his thoughts, torn between asking more questions and walking away. Finally, he managed to speak, though his voice lacked the bite he intended. "I wasn't told about this."
Linda met his gaze, her eyes calm, though she seemed to understand his unspoken questions. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just want to help."
Mark didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were trying to decipher something about her. "Why? Why would you want to help?"
Linda hesitated, looking down at the baby. Her hand gently brushed over the child's soft hair as she spoke. "Because she deserves love, and I know what it's like to need someone to care when everything feels broken."
Mark didn't respond immediately. He just stood there staring at her, his conflicting feelings rising up again. He wasn't sure what exactly he felt. He wanted to pull away, to retreat, but something in him hesitated. Finally he turned, heading for the door. He stopped in the doorway, looking back over his shoulder. "Take care of her," he said quietly, before exiting the room.
Linda watched him go, her heart still racing from the unexpected encounter. She looked down at the baby, who was now dozing peacefully in her arms, and whispered, "Well, little one, that was unexpected."
Outside, Mark walked down the hall, his thoughts a mess. He had seen the baby, heard the way Linda spoke to her, and something inside him had cracked just a little. The image of Linda holding the baby stayed with him, along with her words. She deserves love. It was the truth he couldn't deny, no matter how much he tried to bury it.